Those are the new words to start a meeting. Yeah, so let us start this meeting. Good to see you all. Yeah, you are missing the last meeting. First up order on the agenda is short reflection, and I was encouraged by watching the tape of Stacy talk about her vacation. Her hike around Mount Rainier, so I thought I would report on the trees that I saw on my vacation. We were in southern New Hampshire for 10 days, and with my tree board insight now, I was able to tell immediately that there was a different type of forest out there. It's a large forested area that we have. My wife's family has an old house in it, right down there. But white pines predominate. It's the major evergreen, and there's hemlocks, lots of hemlocks there, and beech, a lot of beech in that area, which I think is not so common around here.
No, we have no native beech here.
Yeah.
In the Northwest.
But the thing about the beech trees is that I learned from one of my nephews, who I don't know where he gets tree information, but he's a smart kid. Is that there's a pretty invasive disease that's affecting the American birch trees and
Birch or beech?
beech. Did I say birch?
Yeah.
Sorry, beech trees. Beech trees. Yes, and it's beech leaf disease. It's called, and you start looking for it then, and you see it on every tree around there. In that part of the area, I guess it started in the Midwest. They say in Ohio, like in 2012, it's first kind of identified and noticed as a tree disease, and it has spread throughout. Like I say, in that area of southern New Hampshire, it's virtually every beech tree has that problem right now. And I think it's a little research I did is that it's often fatal. In most cases, it's a fatal disease for tree caused by a nematode. Little tiny worm. Hi, Doug.
No chairs here.
No empty one.
Anyway, I guess that was the learning for me, was just that this disease would come up so quickly and be so widespread. And it certainly reminded me of parallels with COVID and the kinds of diseases that do affect us too. So as I think about it, I become a more sober human being, thinking about the contingency that is out there for living creatures. Okay, that's my reflection. Any comments, any thoughts on that? Or,
What you didn't see
yeah.
was American chestnut forest,
Oh, yeah.
which used to be one of the dominant species in those forests, but have been completely wiped out by an invasive.
Another.
It's pathogen.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, moving right ahead. It's our custom to do introductions when we see a new person in our midst, a visitor or someone who wants to speak at our meeting. So we'll go around the table really quick. Is there anybody online that you can tell? I can't see anybody, huh? It's just us tonight. No, I know Mark.
No, he's out sick, COVID.
No,
Is he?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Oh. Stacy, go ahead and start the introduction.
Hi, I'm Stacy Spain. I've been on the tree board for I think going on 2 years now, right? Time flies. I've lived in Lake Forest Park since 2018. Yeah, that's all we share.
That's good. Whatever you feel comfortable here, you're superpower. That's great.
Oh my superpower. Oh my god. That took me off guard. I'm so sorry. I have to answer that later. Not thinking on my feet.
I'm Dick Olmsted, and I have been on the tree board. It's my 6th year.
Yeah.
Retired University of Washington professor.
And you loved every bit of it, right? All 6 years.
I have,
Excellent.
and I've lived in Lake Forest Park for 30 years.
Greetings, Richard Saunders. I joined the tree board last October, long-time resident. Welcome.
Victoria Kutas, tree board vice chair, and I've been on the board for about 1.5 years, and I've been in Lake Forest Park for about 10 years.
And I'm Mark Phillips, I'm chair of the tree board currently, and I've been on the board for 3 years, I think, and also lived in Lake Forest Park for a long time.
I'm Doug Sprugel, like Dick, I'm retired from the University of Washington. I've only lived in Lake Forest Park for 10 years.
Hi, I'm Larry Goldman. I'm on the city council. I'm the liaison to the tree board. I've been liaison for as long as I've been on the council, so about 3.5 years.
And he's Elizabeth, I'm the assistant planner with the city, and I run like the administration tree board.
Do I introduce myself?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Hi, I'm Esther Goldstein. I've lived in Lake Forest Park since 2020. I'm a fish ecologist by trade, but I like trees as well. So,
Okay, very good. Did I understand you would like to make public comment in a minute? Or just, that's really not true. Okay, well, we don't have the opportunity. Just a second.
Are you here, do I make a comment or are you going to?
I mean, both. I'm concerned about time commitments for actually joining, but I've thought about it, so.
Oh, good.
Think hard.
Keep thinking. Right. We're gonna approve the minutes that were included in the meeting
Adopt the
agenda
agenda
packet
first.
to adopt them. Pardon me?
Adopt the agenda first.
Oh, yes, indeed. Okay. Thank you, Larry. We are going to look at the agenda, have a chance to look at that. Any thoughts on it? It does seem to me that we missed an item that we ought to add, and that is we should get an update on where we are with ordinance proposals to the council, the tree list and the exceptional trees. Unless while I was gone, you all did something with that and the council adopted them, and I missed all that or something.
We did not, but without Mark here, I don't know that we're gonna have much of an update.
I can give an update in my report section.
Okay. Good. We'll
Don't,
add
don't,
that.
don't get excited.
It's okay then with everybody. We'll add that in maybe as point C before we look at that. Outreach. Okay, so do I hear a motion to approve this agenda? As modified. And a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Now. The minutes from the last meeting, which I think you have in your packets.
I have one edit in the old business. There's a section that I think just got carried over from an old meeting
Yeah.
on the draft climate element. Lines 7 through 10.
I was wondering about that, I said that,
We did not discuss that.
I know. That's what I was saying, the whole thing is wrong.
Just the draft climate element section. We didn't-
That's what I was getting.
Yeah, we didn't discuss that at all last meeting.
Good catch, so that would be omitted. Anything else in this agenda, these minutes, if you wanna. Call to attention? Can we approve these minutes? Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Excellent. Is there a second? Second, Doug, thank you. Minutes are approved. Now. This is the time for public comments. If you would like to do that.
Sure, I mean, I decided to come to a meeting because I have been a little worried about the rates of tree clearings that I've been noticing lately. I had sort of two observations as a citizen. It seems like medium risk trees almost inevitably get approval for removal. I don't know how that works in the city, but it seems like since it's a suburban environment, almost all trees are medium risk. So on that end, I don't understand the approval process and I don't understand kind of the kind of spinning off of that, the tree list. I feel like it could be amended to encourage people to plant native trees. That's better habitat for wildlife. I mean, it is in bold. I've noticed that starred for the plants, but I think, a lot of citizens don't necessarily think about wildlife and microclimates and what this actually needs in their trees. And my other sort of observation as a citizen has been, it seems like most of the new development seems to be clearing entire lots. And I don't really understand the carte blanche to sort of clear the entire lot and then replant with small kind of non-equivalent plants. And particularly for the new developments, it seems like it's mostly, almost entirely non-native trees. So I have concerns that as the system works now, maybe it's not as effective as it could be. And I think there's two things that could be better. It's like public education and kind of encouragement. And I mean, this may not be something that city could do, but if people are removing medium risk trees, why aren't they sort of required to replant native trees? And that seems reasonable to people. So those are my concerns. I've been kind of seeing a lot of tree removals lately. And these are far from homes, do not leaning towards the houses, do not have sick trees, so. I don't necessarily understand the system, but I have concerns about it. And I was trying to look up the actual canopy cover, but the website hasn't been updated since 2016. So I don't actually know how much the canopy cover has been decreasing lately in Lake Forest Park. It hasn't been.
We're all sorry, we don't.
Okay.
But between like 2006 and about 2016, it increased by 4%, like 46% to 50%. And I think we think it's more now, we don't. I think personally. Yeah.
So the new developments lately, do they get, basically, are they allowed to clear the whole lot?
Well, it's a negotiation process. If I can jump in, with the developer's proposal and our city, specifically our arborist or our urban forest planner. The position is currently taken, as far as I know, as we say. And our arborists have been very good in the past in terms of trying to find ways to let developers can preserve those trees. They are required, I think, to preserve rows of trees or a certain portion of a lot is supposed to be preserved. Lots don't always let themselves do that. So I think that our developers, our arborists moderately successful in the past in terms of working with developers to find ways to retain any trees that can be retained. But you are right, I think there is a tendency to clear cut and maybe make a case that that's necessary for
Yeah.
the
It's not equivalent to plant these tiny little
Yeah.
edges. So, yeah, I mean, wildlife needs the trees. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that? We can take a minute to discuss this if we'd like to.
Yeah, it's a great, first of all, just join the tree board.
Yeah.
That's how-
You do have a vacancy,
100%.
One problem we have dealing with that is this is all done by the urban forest planner, for routine urban forest planners, for the actual approval process and what here considers. If we had one here, it would probably be able to answer a question better, but we lost our really wonderful information. We resigned, moved a couple months ago.
I would just. Sorry, Dan.
Go ahead.
I thought you were finished. No, I was just gonna say, your point about sort of educating the public and doing a better job at that I think is something that the tree board can do. And so would love to have your contributions if you think there are better ways to educate the public on the choices that they make whenever they come to develop. The problem is a lot of people who are building a house aren't living here yet, and so it's harder to do that kind of outreach.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, go ahead.
In terms of the city code, the most recent version of the tree code council adopted, I believe what it says is if you cut down a native species, you have to replace it with another native.
Okay.
If you cut down a non-native, you're encouraged to replace it with a native, but not required. And so I think that's where the education piece comes in, which is to say, hey, if you have a sick non-native tree, how about you consider, instead of the same exact species, consider a native equivalent. So I think that there's opportunity for education on the value of native tree species.
We're in the process of, we've been working on an update to that tree list that you referred to. We're gonna talk tonight a little bit about when we take that to the council for the budget proposal. But I don't think that rewritten tree list is anymore to favor native trees, does it? It calls out the native trees, but
It's still that there was some council hesitancy about making it mandatory.
Yeah.
As opposed to just encourage.
Part of the reason for that is there's a lot of sites in town where people don't really want to plant very large trees, and most of our native trees are pretty big. So there's.
And there's so
Requiring
many
native
fabulous trees, so many fabulous tree species you could grow. That are not native, but still contribute to wildlife habitat and diversity and so on.
I think one of the balance, Larry, Mark, and maybe you'll speak to this more, but one of the balances that the city has to, or one of the lines the city has to balance across too is, trying to encourage things without devaluing the land. So to taking value out of the land, which gets into, property rights and that sort of thing. So Like planting of the small trees, I think the idea is that those trees need to, meet your canopy goal after 30 years of growth.
But like you say, that's not pretty consolation for them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it does seem to be a solution that makes a certain sense.
the other consolation is there are about 300,000 trees per city. And the other, that's the house I'm gonna cut every year, the other 299,000 are all getting bigger. So I mean, yes, it is really unfortunate if you take a 30-inch tree or big with a 4-inch one.
Yeah,
But
great change.
all over the rest of the whole city, trees are growing.
Right.
I think that's every second we're solving. Just one last,
Please.
we are talking tonight about trying to get better data for our canopy. So I think that would relate to a lot of the things that you're concerned about. We maybe have better data on showing where there is loss happening, that it's not recovering, where there is growth of the canopy. So getting good data is a big part of this.
And lastly, I share your sadness.
Yeah, I do think a lot of it is education knowledge about lawn. I think to the point of people moving here that haven't lived here, it takes a minute to realize what you're looking at when you move to a place.
Yeah.
Education, understanding what exactly
Totally.
the jobs are.
And how special the canopy, at least in this town, is for sure.
The Times, the Seattle Times did a thing on tree canopy 6 months ago or 8 months ago or something. Issaquah was the only town that had a larger canopy than we. And they had 50.5% something. So we do work on. It's good to keep the big picture in mind, I guess, what I'm thinking in terms of how the overall forest is doing.
This suburb is remarkably treated by Seattle standard, based satellite photos.
Oh, yeah, I've looked, I tried to look at change too, but the lighting's too bright. No.
Well, thank you for.
In front of people, so building it.
Thank you for your comments, and please feel free to stick around and see what the kind of things that we're working on.
Yeah.
If you'd like, you can. So we can turn now to reports and announcements. Larry has already raised some suspense about this.
Yeah, a few updates and non-updates. So the first, as of yesterday, you are wrong.
Oh.
We do have a new urban forest planner. His name is Sam Cole. He started yesterday. Cole, Kull. Let's say he wasn't, because just his first week, he wasn't able to attend this meeting, but he's planning to attend starting in October. So yeah, excited to have him on board. Another update, the planning commission spent much of their August meeting going over the climate element to the comp plan. And so I believe they're likely to be finished with any edits by their meeting next week. And then they're gonna have a public hearing, and then that will come to council for it to be approved by the end of the year. And then the third, the non-update is on the tree code. Basically, Mark is stretched fairly thin at the moment, and the climate element has a firm deadline of the end of this year, whereas the tree code doesn't. And so it's really just a matter of, he was jumping, he had the middle housing deadline of June 30th. And so just trying to figure out when is a good time. So at this point, the tree board is finished in the sense that you've made your recommendations, those have come to council. So it's really just finding time on the calendar where Mark often will have the bandwidth to properly package it up and bring it to council. So it's ready to go, just finding space.
Yeah. And so what I was hoping to read it was just that, to see what the schedule situation looks like. And then it's secondly, just kind of reaffirm our readiness, go ahead with that. I think that's mainly you, Doug. I think you can take a prominent role in that. And
Yeah, I'm sure council would love to hear from someone on the tree board. I know you've been very involved with the number crunching diameter, so yeah, we'd love to have you talk about that when we get to it, yes.
I'm gonna be gone for week and a half towards the end of this month, but want to not that. It's all right,
Our
January.
It sounds early, you're right, it's not gonna happen,
It's possible we might be able to squeeze it in October. I That's a possibility. It also might get pushed to January.
Get more complicated if it goes past the, that is the first few episodes, so few meetings of the council. And taking up introducing new council members, or am I wrong?
Yes, I don't think that would stop us from taking it up. I know we've done some like the ADU code we did a few years ago. That was right when I joined the council, and there was just sort of an expectation that the new council members would be able to get up to speed. So I'm sure if we have any new council, we'll have at least one by definition next January. So I'm sure however many new council members we have will get up to speed. Sure. So I don't think that would be a hindrance.
Thank you, what two of these things are, we have updated the tree code. Tree list. I don't think it doesn't change the issue that I hope the native trees are still highlighted. We added a bunch of new trees to it, and we included a list of trees not to plant. Which it turns out the municipal code says we already have a list like that to get. But once this is approved, that should be essentially a rubber stamp by council, because council really not going to care if we've added some new variety of, crab apple to it. And the tree we put,
I think one thing too that it emphasizes more than the old list isn't that the drought.
yes,
Drought,
We updated
drought,
that.
survivability factors for the percentages.
and the trees were. There's a list of trees that you can't plant as replacement trees or on city property. You can't actually prohibit anybody from planting something in their own yard. It's not done, but there are the prohibited list is for replacement trees. On the land. The other issue is I'm trying to make this brief, I can normally talk about it for half an hour. The current code
minutes.
The current code has says the so-called exceptional trees get the highest level of protection. They get protection just as if they were in a wetland or something like that. They get the most protection the code is able to offer and still be legal. The current numbers were put in there before we had any real data on cities trees. And we do something at the time, prepare some updated numbers that will protect a little higher percentage of the trees in the city. But are also more based on your now that we set the tree limit, the size limit at Douglas fir for 40 inches. That will protect about 4% of Douglas firs. And move other things around. The new numbers more reflect the data we have about the city.
So that list, if it's approved by the council, would have the effect of making the diameter of an exceptional tree smaller, so that more large trees that aren't quite meet the old definition would now be considered exceptional and have those additional protections that Doug mentioned.
And the way it's written, the way we have closed. The trees that are a little less common, like big leaf maple, a lot of species that aren't really very common, will have a lower diameter limit for ultimate protection than Douglas fir, which is really important. We had quite a few of them, so we size it for them quite a bit higher. So it is sort of being written to improve diversity or encourage diversity, at least among the very large trees.
Okay, well, I think we addressed that whole item right there. Forget about item C. But Larry, did you have anything more to report, or did anybody else have a report?
Not anything else from me.
Okay, thank you.
Elizabeth, did you have anything to report, or did I steal your thunder with down?
Oh, that would have been a nice announcement, wouldn't it?
Can we learn a little about Sam's background, or should we wait till he shows up and he can?
Tell us anything you know.
I know that he's very, he was working previously with Puget Sound Energy as an arborist over there, so that's his background. I believe he's from Chicago, or he went to school in Chicago, one of those two. He plays volleyball. And,
Okay. Was he a friend of Drew's?
no.
Oh, he wasn't one of them.
I don't think they know each other, yeah.
I feel like most importantly, his email address is skull@cityofl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is his email, yeah.
SKULL, skull.
Golf.
Again, I'm stealing your. I heard you say that.
Thank you for a lot of nerd.
Yeah, so
Or something.
that's his full name, Sam. So I was like, oh, do you prefer Sam? Do you
Yeah,
prefer
yeah.
Sam, but he said his full name, Sam, last name is Cole. So his city emails school at city. Chicago.
Well, that's
Yeah.
very good news.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, so, but he said he'll join the next meeting, he just started yesterday. And as soon as he walked in the door, before he could even put his stuff down, I had 2 people with tree questions. And I was like, oh my god, like, can you help me out, please? And then I was like, oh, you should probably put your stuff down. Like,
Find your
this
desk.
is your chair. Anyways, can you come to the counter and help us out? So he hit the ground running, and he's helped quite a lot of people already.
You, okay, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark's got another thought.
I did, I'm sorry, another thought jumped to my head. I know you mentioned that you've been working on the new permitting system.
Yes,
Can you say a word about that?
yeah, we went live last week,
Is it all of our permits, building
Yeah.
permits, is it tree permits too?
all the permits. So before it used to be where you could only apply online for mechanical and plumbing permits, and everything else was paper. It's not fun, especially because we're a tree city. But we did go live last Tuesday, no, August 27th. That was Thursday or Wednesday. So yeah, any permit you could apply for now on our new system. And I think
Okay,
show,
I'm sure that's been exciting for you.
yeah, it's exciting. Just not having to take so much paper is really nice.
When Mark Hoffman brought it to council, he was very excited about being able to modernize our permit software.
Among other things, it should make it easier to. We've been. At various times in the past, we had a list of permits that were granted before we being taken out, things like that, and that's not often on, but if it's all electronic. It should be easier to get back to doing that, and for somebody who wants to come in next year to go back and look quickly. And have 1 year date at that point,
Yeah.
instead of having to go to stack of paper like that.
Do you know if the system will allow us to do that kind of reporting to address things like you were mentioning earlier of like, it seems like a lot of permits are being approved. How often are they also being denied? Do you know if it'll let us look at that for like, give me all the tree permits for the last year and their statuses?
I believe it would be easier for this system.
Okay.
It's a little bit more, has more capabilities than what we had before, for sure. So I'm pretty sure it should be able to do that and compete, but pretty sure it can, because it does have more features than our previous system.
I thought I remembered that the tree board used to get some form of reporting from the city on that. Is that, am I misremembering that, like long before my time?
No.
Okay,
But it was kind
Two
of,
or 3 arborists ago.
okay.
yeah. And it's a manual process, I think, of pulling out stuff, going through the list.
But hopefully if they can just pull us an
It's
Excel
easy.
sheet on the
Yeah.
first Wednesday of each month, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be, yes, I agree.
Times when I've gone through some new systems. It's not fun until the 2 or 3 months later.
It's
The transition.
It's not, right now though, it's like, we still haven't done the finance part of it. So it's like, we have to input the payment on a separate system, then re-put it into this system. So if you do check online, it does say our payments are not through that system yet.
Oh, yeah.
So it's requiring a little bit of
Yeah.
working out
That-
those issues.
Good, well, thank you for that.
It does sort of speak well for the city that they didn't say, okay, we'll get the taking money part in first and we'll worry about the stuff. We're getting the taking money part in last, which is not really a terrible thing.
Yeah, it
But-
depends how you look at it.
Turning to old business. We have several items to figure out tonight, I think, at least one, and that's the first one, the SFI grant, following up on that. I know Larry has some information in a minute on that, but where we are, I believe, and it's mentioned in the minutes, or maybe it wasn't, Victoria and I had a good Zoom call with Mark Hoffman and with Mike Martini, the grant coordinator at SFI, and to be sure we understood where we stood. As I understand it, we've essentially been approved that grant. But
Yes,
we got to get an agreement in place in order to actually get the money. This is a 70,000, almost $71,000 grant from SFI, Sustainable Forests Initiative. And it's US Department of Forestry funds that they are the agent for grant writing, grant making and distributing. Mike in DC is very concerned that the opportunity for those funds may dry up as other federal money has been drying up. But it's still alive and he's hoping that if we want to pursue it, we could take some steps and mention that in a second. So I think the thing is that Mark seems to be thinking often that we really need to decide, yes, we want to pursue this. Now, I thought it was a tacit understanding amongst us that we did want to pursue it, but that's what we want to be sure that we're in agreement tonight if we do want to pursue that grant. The heart of the grant is a comprehensive review of our forest management practices using those 15 or 16 standards that SFI has developed for urban and community forest management. As the structure, they got those 16 goals, then each one of those has several performance measures under it. So that'd be the heart of it. Out of that would come a report as to how we could, where we are, what we're doing well, what we're working on, and what we really need to work on, or something like that. To identify real gaps in our management practices according to the standards that SFI is. So that's the heart of it. The other thing is it would be included in that. A portion of the grant would go to something called pre-audit readiness. So it would out of that an overall analysis would come a determination whether we were able to go for SFI certification. Something we may or may not ever really want to do. Seems to me, I haven't really studied what the benefits of that are. There probably are some. But at any event, the grant that we would be looking at would has a component that would get us ready to do that. Basically, I think it would put a kind of capstone on the comprehensive work that was done and just sum up, here's what you got to do. Or maybe in our case, we're nearly there. I don't know. I don't know if you had a chance to look at those standards, you get some sense after those as to whether they seemed to me they were pretty comprehensive, but
yeah, I will say I was pleased. I was kind of expecting a hard sell from SFI to get us to do their certification. And instead talking to Mike, he basically said you have to do the $5,000 pre-certification, but the full certification costs about 50,000. And he basically said, like, don't do that. Basically said, like, I don't recommend it unless you really want to go down that path. So I was pleased to hear that. And he was eager to work with us to figure out how to write the agreement to meet our needs within the confines of what they are allowed to fund. They cannot fund some of the things we were hoping for, so things like the city tree audit, to get pardon me, get an inventory of all of the city-owned trees. They cannot do. We are not allowed to do that under this funding. He said we can't put in language that makes it explicit that this is for writing or drafting a forest management plan. But he's like, I'm really good at finessing not using those words and getting you that product at the end of this. So it sounds like from our conversation and what he wrote up for us in the agreement, we can't just use it to be $70,000 to have someone write a forest management plan for us. But a significant number of the steps in doing that, their assessment should be able to give us all of the pieces we need to plug into an updated forest management plan.
So, George, you said that they did not recommend going for the larger 50,000. Does that mean our grant size shrinks?
Nope, we have $71,000 to 70,600 to do this project, no matter what. And he basically said, I don't recommend you spend 2/3 of that getting certified.
it's something we can do later.
Yeah.
Anytime we want.
Okay. And the other thing was one brain. Right there. I'll ask him.
It is something that can be used to, and the way Drew wrote the original budget she wrote was that a significant chunk of the funding would be used to pay the urban forest planner's salary and pay city expenses for work that she was qualified to do under the scope of the grant. So depending on Sam's skills, expertise, et cetera, that's something that we would need to assess is how much of this is something that he would be doing or carrying out, and how much of it is something that we would need to be finding a contractor to bring in to be paying to do it.
Is that-
One of,
In addition to the, for 30 hours a week, is 3 hours a week, or just,
I think it's like,
I
basically one day.
do not know, I assume that would be between Mark and Sam to figure out.
well, but I mean, the question is, are we getting money just to save Lake Forest Parks some money, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, that's right, it would
One-
help pay that person's salary.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that Mark mentioned on the call, Mark Hoffman mentioned on the call, was that in deciding our recommendation tonight on if we are actually moving forward with this, is he has limited bandwidth. Sam will have limited bandwidth and need to get his feet under him and get set up. So is this the priority that we want to recommend we spend our time on, and we use what capital we have with them on, or are there other priorities that we want to be moving forward instead? So basically, like, we can't just keep putting things on that stack. At some point, we need to
Yeah.
take
we're
something
talking
else off the
second
table
about
if we choose to put this on.
There are some kind of risks involved. in things.
So-
I just want to say for Esther's benefit, the city of Lake Forest Park has a forest management plan that was developed in 2011, I think. And so one of the things we'd like to do is to work towards updating that. And while this contract money, as Victoria said, can't be used specifically for developing a forest management plan, the data that it will derive is exactly the kind of data that we need to, when we then put into a forest management plan, develop otherwise, so. I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes,
So you, Victoria, you said you can't use the grant to do the canopy analysis.
Or an inventory, correct?
So if we, for the next topic, if we have the canopy data, can they use that as input to their evaluation, or?
I would assume so.
Yes.
It's we can't be doing inventory work, so we can't say one of the things in our graph that we need you to do as part of this assessment is to go out and count all of the trees on city property. We can't pick to do that.
So those two things could go really
Yeah.
nicely.
And we could choose
Yeah.
to ask the city to say, someone is already doing all of this work, can we also tack on and pay that same person to also do an inventory? It just couldn't be funded under the grant, but if we chose to ask the city to do that or found other funds to do it, we could potentially have the same person do it, and that's one of the recommendations he had of, if you have work beyond this scope that you would like to bundle with it, because you can sometimes get a better price in going to a contractor and saying, can you do this full scope of work instead of doing it piecemeal, and going to a different contractor in a year to have them do the inventory now, the city tree inventory. We could look at doing that again. Capacity and budget with the city would be the question mark there.
Yeah.
And I know that was one of the key things that we had talked about in previous conversations,
That
being
sounds
excited to potentially have and would not be part of this at this point in the package.
It'll be a great deal harder to do most of those things, not knowing what we currently got.
Mhm.
That's the way to that's the way to I think. The idea of whether we hire the urban forest planner as part of this, one question would be whether he. I think he works 30 hours a week now, my impression is he's pretty much full-time out reviewing permitting issues.
Is it the same work structure as Drew was on? Yeah. So let's.
So, but anyway, can he take in, now does he take one full day or a week out of the 4 days a week he works, work on this? I mean, just can the other stuff get done?
That's right, that's right. So there are risks in terms of the staffing level. There are things to be done, if we should pursue this, there's an RFP to be pulled together so we can find a contractor to do this work. And that, you know, again, Drew was good enough to kind of sketch out an initial RFP that we might use. There's be a grant management process, of course, there's a monthly reporting, and then there's reporting, as you incur expenditures, you can report. And get reimbursed, it's a reimbursement type of grant. And so this, you know, whether we have the bandwidth in the city with Sam getting on board and with a lot of other stuff.
Mark, to that reporting point, I looked at, saw some earlier notes where we said that the city doesn't do reporting for grants under 100,000. That accurate?
Well, we will be required to report, it's under the terms, as I understand it, the terms of the agreement that we're working on.
I'm just saying it may be an issue for the city. If the city if the city
I see, yeah.
doesn't do reporting for grants under 100,000, then they.
Well, we brought up reporting, you know, reporting, performance reporting of the meeting with Laura, and he didn't raise that objection. Okay, but it is something we should pursue, I guess.
I have a question about that. So you mentioned that there is some time sensitivity for approving the grant. Once the grant is approved, what's the time deadline for actually doing the work?
It's the next calendar year, I believe.
1 year.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
technically, we originally had until the end of 2025 to accept the funds. They are getting pressure from US Forest Service to see movement on things. He said that movement could just at this point include a letter from the city on city letterhead saying, we are still interested, working on it. But at this point, he has nothing formal from us saying that we're doing anything. And then once we have that, he would like we would need to get council approval, et cetera, and get a formal approval put together as soon as we can, but he understands that can be a weeks to months process, and then we would have 1 year to spend on the funds.
And I think that that's an important thing, if we're getting a new forest planner up to speed.
Yeah.
Knowing that we have at least 12 full months from when this is signed to get the work done, does take some of the pressure off it.
There, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the new language in it, there is an updated agreement since the original one that was given to Drew. And the primary update is new language around what will happen if the funds do get canceled from the federal government. And protections so that they would not be able to claw back already spent funds, and then we would have, I believe, another 30 days to get in any final statements for any funds already expended, but it would be effective immediately. We would not be able to expend any more funds. So there is always the chance that we would get halfway through and something would change with the federal funding. That would mean if we hadn't started on it, or if we'd only gotten a quarter of the way through, we may not be able to finish the project.
Interesting how words creep into our language. Blob, back. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just another risk factor to consider of how much time and energy we are putting into it and what the chances are we will get to the end of it.
Yeah, the agreement we had with Mike, I think, it was that we would provide a letter after our meeting tonight.
Correct.
If we really would, we want to recommend to go ahead. And I'm happy to draft that letter, or, you know, again, and share with Mark. It could either come from him, maybe be signed by Mayor French. But just a simple letter stating we are very much interested. We've had some delays in getting the agreement together for such and such a reason. And we expect to have that within a month or something. And then, Larry, you had some thoughts in terms of the timing of council approval.
Yes, so I spoke with the rest of council leadership yesterday, actually. And it seems like we should be able to fast track this. Assuming that the tree board votes tonight to move forward. Council's plan would be September 11th at our work session to introduce it. And we are, Mark, I'm hoping that you'll be able to attend our work session to give an introduction to the council. And then
Next Monday.
It's a week from tomorrow.
Okay.
That's 11 to 6.
Right. That's right. I remember those.
In this room. And then assuming that that goes well, then we would take it up at our September 25th council meeting to vote on it. So it would be an accelerated schedule, considering that there are concerns about the existence of the money.
Continued existence. of
And I guess
the
it's somewhere along the line, our attorney needs to look at it and get.
Yeah, so the idea would be that even if the contract hasn't been finalized, you could still give the same sort of introduction that you did tonight at the work session. And then that would still give a couple of weeks now and get the final contract language for the 25th.
You know, I bet that it's ready for her to look at now. Have you seen it? It's pretty complete. It's 90% federal boilerplate, language.
Mhm.
And and then the stuff that Drew provided.
Work statement of work, essentially.
Yeah, and I shared that with you before the meeting. I don't know that we need to take a look at it. It basically just says what we said, to do an analysis,
What actually can be done? I mean, I'm not. The things I was most interested in, I say we can't write a forest management plan. Can't do a survey of the city's trees. Which is to me. Very unfortunate, you said it's what it is. What is there left to do?
well,
I mean, I'm not
you
saying.
got just to look at the standards. We need the standards for SFI standard.
Right. I
So,
did.
okay, so it's basically hiring somebody who knows trees and forests to take those standards. He says 15 and on the website it's 16, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And to use those as a screen for analyzing how we as a city approach our community forests. Through our codes, through our outreach programs, through our parks, through our current management plans. Yeah, and identify what we're doing well and identify what we're not doing well. And then give us recommendations for how we could improve.
Do we still have public feedback?
Well, that was something we talked to him about, and yes, we thought that it does. The grant monies can be used for public outreach. So we could have a couple of meetings that we can put in there, that consultant might manage for us, so we might be involved. But yeah,
Again, I sort of thought that. Again, I can't do this on here, if we're gonna do a new community forest management plan. It'd be nice if the community has some input into it.
absolutely.
And of course, if we can possibly get the community's input without it being technically the management plan, or at least the beginning of it,
Yeah,
that's fine.
and I would guess this would not be the end all of the community input. But the community input that would be a part of this contracted study that we would do.
That would be nice to know what the community thinks of the way we're managing our forest.
Exactly.
If one member expressing concern.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
And be nice to know if that's, universally.
There is a certification process too, part of it. Looks like it's part of the.
Well, it's a pre-certification audit, is what we should be part of the grant we're looking at. I think the actual certification is a little more costly and
Is that a 50K?
yeah, I was mentioning 50K. It's not clear to me if he were to start it from scratch and do it in one fell swoop, if there would be some economies of that, I don't know. But that was figured that was mentioned for doing that. If you have in your minutes, if you want to take a look at them, the description, I'm sorry, I didn't put a heading on this thing. It's like a statement of purpose from the agreement. And it's just basically talks about how we manage our forests. Policy changes are driven by facts and data, et cetera. Anyway. There's also that little bit of a draft budget in there, which according to Mike Martini in Washington would be okay for us. It calls for 7 hours. It calls for paying 7 hours of an arborist work. Once a week. Yeah, so that's a pretty significant chunk of the salary that could be paid for that.
Was pretty significant.
It would mean, if anybody ever audits it, the auditor, the arborist would have to be ignoring permit requests 1 day a week.
Well, I wonder if this
I mean,
money
and if
could
they
be
weren't,
used to
it's like-
supplement and give the person more time and therefore.
Yeah, if we could hire them more days, if they want to be hired more days, that would be, yeah. No, that would be great.
I suspect that would be a question for Mark Hoffman and other city staff.
Yeah.
Would this replace their current duties or would they be 30 hours plus this?
It is also not clear this was written based on Drew's skills and experience. So we don't actually know if Sam would have the same skills, experience, and certifications to be conducting the work, or if it would need to be hired through and done through an external contractor,
Oh,
which,
yeah, that's a good point.
and
Yeah.
Drew did have a good portion, there's a portion of it written that way, and then 45,000 would be,
Yeah.
is still written for external consulting, but that may need to be 100% of it done by external consultants potentially. We would need to discuss that with.
Well, that's a question. If you take out 23,000, 22,000 for salary, including fringe benefits. That leaves you, what, 43,000. And that's under my list of potential risks, whether that's enough money to hire a contractor to do that work. Seems to me we test the water and see. So, it might be something that, for what that doesn't work out. Or it might be that that's the case where we want to try to leverage some other money, reboard money to augment that. And like we were talking about a minute ago, maybe adding in some additional components of interest to us. In addition to this SFI review.
Anybody, did you, Elizabeth or Larry, know what? I think it's watershed is being paid for sort of managing the park, new park, waterfront park. Management description, all fair number of meetings and things like that. Project process.
Look at me, how much we're paying TCG watershed.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't. Do you know how much we're paying?
I
Elizabeth,
imagine it's significantly
I
more.
just joined
Oh,
your
sure,
meeting.
it's more of
Can
it.
you make it so that I am a host and can share my screen?
You make it an hourly rate or something.
Well, I was just wondering, if it's paying them $300,000 to do that very large project. And 70,000 for this project should be quite reasonable. If we're paying them $750,000 to do that project, we probably can't get this done.
Right.
And if we're paying them $150,000 to do that project, then it's a piece of cake, which I think so like. But anyway, that's the reason I'm asking, we don't know the answer to
It
this.
doesn't look to me that there's any penalty for us if we were to go ahead and pursue this and then just find out we couldn't find the right contractor or the right individual to carry this out for us. I'm thinking that it's probably gonna be an external contractor to do that work.
For at least a portion of it, I would assume
Just
so.
some of the same-
And Mike had a number of recommendations of folks who are, who do these certifications and audits locally. So he was eager to help us find someone who would be the right fit for doing it. You had asked what is covered, since we don't actually have the standards in front of us, I just wanted to pull up and show, these are the 16 standards that objectives that they would be measuring against. So looking at and assessing our urban and community forest standards around community, people, and indigenous participation, human health and well-being, protection and conservation, etc. So these are the themes of things they would be looking at in doing the assessment.
By the way, there's a lot of correlation here to what the climate element and the climate committee is trying to do. So when we pitch it to the council, I think making it clear, this is not just benefiting the trees and the tree board.
Especially like I'm thinking objective 10 specifically of the disaster readiness, response and recovery. There's a lot of in the new climate element.
I think too, when you get to, well, there is a link, maybe I think it's at the top right corner of that page or somewhere, when it takes you to what's called guidance. And it just breaks in all of those into a page description, a lot more detailed information. But each one, we don't need to dig
Yeah.
too deeply into that, but it's all there pretty.
Read through
quite a
all
bit
the
of detail.
details of them.
Yeah. Like I say, it seemed to me like a pretty comprehensive screen to look at it. SFI, I learned, started out as a forest products industry organization. And they developed standards for logging operations in Canada and in the United States. And that's their background, which caused me some pause for reflection. But apparently sometime in the recent future, they have developed a community and urban forest component.
This is why I was pleasantly surprised they weren't just trying to sell us their certification.
Yeah, anyway, well, one of there were two certifications. And one I think was considered somewhat significantly easier to achieve than the other. You know, if you want, if a company, say, well, people wants to sell forest, sell timber and say it's sustainably harvested. SFI was one of the people who say, yes, it's sustainable, it's certified. And I can't recall what it was.
It was another, I saw that too. It was another organization that offered a certification. Well, I ran into the certification process when I was working on the Salmon Recovery Council. When we were on the project committee there, where we had about $2.5 million to respond to grant proposals and there were folks who wanted to get, you know, breweries and restaurants along the Sammamish River that wanted to be certified as green if they took out some blackberries and some things like that. It was kind of interesting discussions. What really do those certifications really mean? Is it this salmon friendly? All those certifications that you see. Anyway, as far as I can tell, this would be on the up and up, and that I'm impressed with what the guy we spoke with in Washington, the grant manager, and I'm impressed with those standards.
I think the question is if we have limited things we can ask of and capacity to ask of Mark and Sam. Is this what we want to ask for their capacity on for potentially the next year as the primary project that we are tackling with them?
Similar to what the climate element was this past year.
Potentially, in some ways.
Are there other things crossing your mind when you say that?
Not necessarily, but the one Mark brought up the other day was, does he have capacity to take this to council in the next month? Or to take the code amendments to council in the next month? Does, like, how many things does he have capacity to push through approvals and do his end of the admin on?
Let's get the hang of permitting tree. Well, I think Larry addressed that too. If it sounds like the order of priority would be to try to move this along. And then and to deal with the again, the ordinance proposals after that.
Larry, what's your take on how council would receive this?
I think if we can show that the budget would be neutral for the city, I think that would definitely be a positive. If we can show synergy that it ties into the climate action plan, if it ties into the comprehensive plan, I think that would be positive. To me, I don't think this would be particularly controversial. Also, and I don't want to, I'm trying not to put my hand on the scales. I've observed over the past several meetings that you've been very interested as a tree board in updating our urban forest plan. And it seems that this could be a good first step towards updating the forest plan. So that also seems like an area of synergy. I'm not trying to put, again, I mean, it's entirely your decision if you want to recommend this as your priority.
There's not a penalty to us if we should pursue it along these lines and then discover somewhere after an agreement is reached that we don't have the wherewithal to pursue it or whatever other things might come. I think we have a mutually agreeable cancellation process there. If no money has been expended.
Yeah, and I think if the council is open to this, why would we stop it from council consideration?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to give us money to evaluate how well we're managing our forests. I mean, that's kind of our job, is to manage our forests, and if somebody's willing to give us money to help us evaluate that, I think it's something we should take. I mean, it's not, may not be the way I would want to spend $70,000, but it's a really nice thing to do.
Yeah.
So to be clear, I've only spoken with one other council member who is supportive. The other 5, I just based on what I know of the council, you know, showing that it's budget neutral, I think would be important for some other council members, but I make no promises of what.
Yeah.
Mark will be able to report back after about how the work session goes.
I just mean, even if there's an opportunity that the council would be positive, consider it positive. Then why would we stop it from counting that?
Yeah. Are we at a point of agreement? Think,
Do we need a motion? Do we need to take?
yes, let's have a motion.
Yeah, I think you should make a motion, make this an official vote that you're recommending that we pursue the SFI grant.
That's the motion.
Well,
I something like, with somebody on a tree board member like to
Who
make
is
that.
allowed to make that statement?
Richard. I move that the tree board make a recommendation to council to pursue the SFI grant. And finalize the details of the grant response that are
The agreement.
the agreement.
But to move forward with the grant agreement. Because we have already been, I want to be clear, we've already been awarded for the grant by SFI. We just have to agree to take the money from them. So we are not applying for anything.
Okay, so we are moving forward with completing the application.
With accepting the funds.
I suggest Victoria, Victoria seems to have a pretty strong opinion what we should be moving. And she's
Yeah, I was trying to help and then I just. I
thought you were real close.
Had my hand up and everything.
Yeah, this came up a number of times in our meeting with Mike, that he was very clear, we have been awarded the grant, so we do not have to apply for the grant or apply for anything with SFI.
Move to recommend acceptance.
Yes.
You
So-
make the motion. Go ahead.
Moving that the tree board send a recommendation to city council to approve the SFI grant and move forward with an agreement to accept the funds.
Is there a second? Yes, Stacy, a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Keep it in my head.
Any opposed? Thank you, that's good. I feel like that's a good decision.
So what I will do is I'll send an email to the mayor, Mark, but with city staff, Deputy Mayor Tracy. For Connie, just to kind of confirm that you've approved this and that inviting Mark to the work session next Thursday.
And I will draft a letter that we promised like Martini at DC and send it to, I'll check with Mark if he's okay with me drafting a letter for him to either sign or give to the mayor to sign. So
Do we have any sense how long Mark's gonna be out?
He said this week.
Okay.
And then we'll see how he feels on that day.
okay,
And that's why kind of having the runway of the work session is really Mark giving an introduction that we don't necessarily have to have all of the contract language ready to go.
We told Mike that we would get him a letter from someone at the city indicating that we intend to move forward with taking it to council. So he needs something just like on city letterhead that says, we're planning to do something about this. And that's what Mark was talking about drafting, but I'm not sure who at the city or council that can come from at this point.
Right.
If
He can
Mark
figure
is
that
out.
yeah, so Larry, say again what you thought your most optimistic timeline was for
Um,
council approval?
Introduce it on the 11th at the work session. And assuming that it's not controversial at the work session, then approve it at the 25th council meeting. Normally, we like to do 3 touches. This would only be 2 touches. But if there's extenuating circumstance, if it's not controversial and there's a risk of the money being rescinded, then I think we can make a push for only doing 2 touches.
Yep.
I would hope it's not controversial, but somebody wants to give us money to do a good thing. I'm almost universally recognized with it.
Money rarely comes without strength.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're right, you're right. Definitely.
I mean, full disclosure, you did bring up some potential risks
Yeah.
at this meeting, so it's not just a ribbon-free gift that there are. So yeah, there might be some questions from other council members as to what the catch is.
I'm sure that they're very interested in having cities and other organizations actually participate in their process and getting their certifications. I think it builds their organization. Okay, well, thank you. That's great. So we got some ideas of how to move forward on this and maybe we can keep in touch any developments between now and the next meeting. Are we ready to move on to the next topic, which is a little easier, I think? This is the King Conservation District canopy assessment follow-up. So this is King Conservation District has an agreement with Planet Geo IT. Planet Geo IT, a consulting organization. And they are doing they're offering to do a canopy analysis of cities in King County. Maybe broader than that, but this works from King County. So they have a kind of a blanket contract with KCD to provide these, and KCD is interested in plugging cities into this who are interested. You know, we have this jurisdictional account with King Conservation District. It's about 135,000 right now. It's every property owner in the city in King County pays $12, used to be $10 for years and years. I think it's $12 now a year. And it goes for King Conservation District and conservation projects they do. And so all the taxpayers from the property owners from Lake Forest Park have contributed to this fund that we have, 135,000. Anyway, this would be $4,000 draw on that, $4,000 draw on that. That was pretty reasonable.
This is analysis of data based on airplanes flying over using LiDAR, which basically gives you an analysis on every square meter basis. Is the forest canopy there or not? Then integrated over the whole fleet.
So
It doesn't tell you what the trees are. There's trees in this area, and that's where we get this number of 50% canopy cover.
there were. Remind me of this. There are 5 standard, what they call geographies, that would be given to us for that 4,000. At least 3 of them didn't sound like they were very helpful. One was something called a watershed, which basically for us, I think would be the whole city. And that information here. And then the ones that would be useful for us was I thought was something called a precinct level. And a precinct turns out to be a fairly small piece of geography. And then there's something called an precinct area, which is a combination of several precincts. And then at the lower level, they have something called a hexagonal. I don't know if that's a term that you scientists know about, but it's something smaller than a precinct, but not quite at the parcel level. Not quite to the parcel level, so it'd be like, I guess, 3 or 4 parcels together, something on that order, I believe. Which seemed like it would be pretty good for our purposes. I know we had spoken, and Doug, you mentioned before, interest in a parcel level analysis. Anyway, so I don't, for us to do a parcel analysis, it's not one of the standard geographies, and I think we would have to figure out how to get. They need GIS data input to do this from us, for the ones that aren't the standard. They got the precinct information, the whatever the hexagonal is, and the precinct area.
Which I have the Burien example up if you would like me to screen share. I can show you.
I have one that shows the hexagonal.
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
So we can't even pay to get like parcel and the public right away.
We could.
We would need to provide them a map. So whatever maps we give them, they can give us this data for, but
Whatever.
we need to tell them how to divide up the map.
We need to give them the GIS information that defines those other geographies we would want. If we wanted city parks, that would be fairly easy to do. And I've been trying to figure out, Elizabeth, maybe you'll have some way to help me with this. But whether we already have in our city GIS information for our parks. But we'd have to provide that information to them. If we did, it would be free. It would be within the 4,000. They'll give us 2 extra geographies. For free before we have to start paying for additional stuff.
For Burien, they have the census block groups. And so for each census block, you get all of the canopy analysis. You have. They also did their watersheds. Not sure, I haven't played with theirs.
That's not so helpful.
And then this is what the hexagons look like.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
That's at a pretty
It
helpful
gives
level, it seems
you-
to me.
an interesting map of the city, but it doesn't give you like
With that,
parcel.
they do this on a comparison basis, because a lot of what I'm interested in is where are our forests growing, where are they not?
Yeah,
And you compare this to-
so you have the choice, the base year is 2017, so you can look at the 2023 data, you can look at the 2017 data. Or you can look at the canopy change between the two.
And I had notes from Drew telling us that she thought that we would be well suited to do what Bothell did. Individual parcel level, city-owned trees and zones.
How do I
I have-
change cities?
I have a list of GIS information for Lake Forest Park. We have road overlay repairs, culverts, water districts, the city boundary, wetlands. City hall, city zoning and open spaces.
We have GIS information data for that. It's because the one that did seem interesting to me was streams and streams operating. I
Yeah,
like,
so
I
we
like,
have, we have wetlands, and I think the things that are interesting for us are
That's where
open
it's super-
spaces, wetlands, water, well, culverts maybe.
Well, I don't know what they want, but you can go into King County GIS maps. Touch a parcel and it says point X and point Y. And it doesn't say how big it is, so.
Yeah, so can
So-
we download that data?
well, the theory,
Absolutely.
it probably in the bowels of King County somewhere is that information. And Ellen, our contact at KCD, wasn't aware of how to work with that
Yeah,
easily. But there's probably a way that you could find that. If you really thought that that parcel level would be more helpful than the hexagonal.
Well, I'll say more,
So-
but also helpful.
This is. What I have up now is Bothell,
Mhm.
and Bothell's got the parcels, if you zoom out. It doesn't show it by parcel for some reason, you have to zoom all the way in, I assume that that would be similar on ours.
Mhm.
But then once you zoom in, you can see each parcel by parcel, what their data is.
Mhm.
So their canopy and their possible planting area. The others that Bothell had is planning sub areas. And
Planning
So-
sub areas is probably an area that they've defined in their city planning,
I would assume so,
you know.
they have riparian areas.
Yeah,
So
see that?
they can look at all of their, sorry, my Zoom is a little finicky on this computer, I'm not used to this one.
It'd be helpful to know if stream keepers should concentrate on Lion
I
Creek
think they're
versus McAleer in terms of the
Sept
planting
basins.
project. For example, one of these streams might be interesting or buffer.
we have polygon data, I don't know if that means anything.
Maybe that's hexagonal.
Maybe
Maybe.
Well, my.
hexagon is polygon.
Hexagon is a polygon, yeah.
The hexagons would be useful, for example, looking to see how we're doing on equity. You know, are the rich parts of the city doing better than poor, and looking to change the different equities. But the parcel level information is useful because among other things, if you cut down trees on your lot, how much you have to put back on is somewhat dependent on what your cut or lot coverage is.
Well, they're able to do
That's
that
funny.
now. I don't know what they system they use, but if you go in to get a permit, last time I got a permit to.
Well, we had
remove a
the
tree.
information from the last analysis.
Yeah,
I can show you.
they can look at my parcel and they can draw the trees that are being removed, other the trees. And they can say, well, look, you have 64% coverage. And if you remove these trees, and they're just using the pen on the screen, and it will tell you what. I mean, I'm not saying that the
When
parcel
I
would
last
be
did,
helpful, but
when I last did a tree permit, that needed to be done by the arborist that I
Yeah,
had do
yeah.
my permit, so the arborist came in and measured every tree on my property.
oh,
And then
physically, oh,
gave the, report to the city.
But when I last applied for a permit, I just got the satellite photos that are available, which are quite precise, and said, okay, I'm taking out this tree. I plan to do in there and do in there. I think I actually listed all the trees by property, there's maple here, so.
Yeah.
But what I had to do was identify the tree I was taking out. And, let, whoever the farmer was supposed to figure out how big it was for safety unit.
what would you say, Mary?
It occurs to me that, so basically with KCD, there's a menu of options and we would choose 3 of those. So I wonder maybe brainstorming on like writing down the list of options on the board. And then getting a sense of the room, which of those do people really like, parcel level, hexagon level, zoning level?
I think the real question is, what can we get from, what does the city own? So what maps can we give to them?
We can give them wetlands, open spaces, culverts. We already have all that polygon GIS
Okay.
data.
But somebody must have the parcel data, maybe it's King County, not the city of Lake Forest
This-
Park.
There's a King
This
County
includes
GIS
parcel.
open.
Okay.
data portal.
Yeah,
Okay,
parcel is one of the layers.
Okay, great.
So would it be helpful to kind of brainstorm the list or?
Yeah,
Is there,
I'm sure what I'm just trying to figure out.
like, basically, I'm wondering, like, are you able
Yeah.
to do this
Can we
orally
get
or
to it?
would it be helpful to, for someone, and just write it down?
How many do we have included? Mark?
Mainly I ask because I'm
There
starting
are-
to get
there are
confused
five-
with the options.
And we
There
wanna
are, there are
make,
5 standards that you
Okay.
could choose. If I could see,
What were the other ones that you said you had that seemed interesting that you said you had?
We have wetlands, open spaces, culverts.
the hexagon is one that we should, I like the way.
Those are,
it's marked there.
I think hexagons is one of their defaults.
Okay,
it is. Yeah,
I don't know how culverts would fit into this.
Yeah,
We're
maybe
looking for
not.
Canopy cover.
There's city zoning, I don't think that's interesting.
what,
There's
I mean,
water
or
district.
so that's one of the things they had, Bothell seemed to have was their zoning areas.
Okay,
Is
perfect.
that something that we would find interesting to look at?
Okay, city zoning then.
I think so.
Oh, there is,
I'm
okay.
not sure. I don't know if it- It's not. And that would be a step, so they had 5 standards, do you recall what they were? The precinct and the precinct group. There was something called watershed, HUD or something that Helen didn't think was very useful. For some reason I can't seem to find the last one.
I can look at my email.
You might want to stop
Coming
sharing
back to-
I am.
before you pull your email up.
I will. Thank you.
I sort of keep coming back to the equity thing, something because the last time I looked hard at these. Our maps from the previous one, it was to try to figure out where we were short on trees in the city and where we should encourage King County or Metro to be planting the new trees they're putting in. And it was at that point that was done, that was on a parcel level. You would get that same information from the hexagon, you would, put a few, right, some of you guys remember. I just went in and drew a line, and all of a sudden it became part of the ordinance. But, we just. Knowing what areas of the city have trees, what areas of the city. Was useful for that. I still like the idea of having the parcel information, but I think for what we did for that, hexagons might actually have been a little better.
Having the park information.
Hmm?
Park information.
Park information would be really useful.
open spaces.
That's open spaces.
I would discourage you from census. Census plots are very large and also a number of our census plots are shared with shoreline.
Hmm.
So I think that would muddle the data.
Precinct level data, I was surprised at how it looked to me to be quite useful.
Good.
That's mentioned, so there was open spaces. And what else was there?
So with
So,
wetlands.
yeah, parcel, wetlands, open spaces, zoning and hexagons.
So I think we're confusing some things, right?
Are we
so
confusing
that-
what the city has versus what KCB's menu?
Thank you,
Yeah.
exactly.
So see the menu, make another column, the column that is just okay.
So LMP, so we have parcels, we have zones.
We have parcel information, eh?
That's
Seems to be what it.
not what they're calling it, so let's just be really clear in terms of what they're calling it. We have city zoning,
Okay, those.
we have open spaces. And we have wetlands. I think those are the things we're interested in.
Not parks, huh? Or
Open
right-
spaces.
Parks are right away,
I think open spaces are parks.
maybe that's parks, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're open spaces, that's the answer.
Sure.
I mean, mostly what these maps tell you is where the open space is.
Right,
I'm not sure that we need them.
but these maps have layers of data.
Alright, so this is the GIS data the city can give would be our zoning, our open spaces, our wetlands.
Yeah, and those maps are multi-layered, polygon, right? Data. And the things that are included in that data are I can tell you in a second.
Okay, so that's,
The
so that's,
Here,
So we may have parcel.
Parcel data, yes, parcel data is one of those layers. So we have parcel data for every one of the LFP choices. So we have parcel data for this open spaces, we have parcel data for the city zoning, we have parcel data for the wetlands, right? It's a topic under each of those.
so
Okay.
that's the data that the GIS data that the city can bring.
Right.
And then what's the menu of options for KCD?
Let me just ask Stacy, does that mean we could provide, or should we have parcel data, we can say these 84 parcels are open space? Just tell us about those parcels.
Yeah, I think so,
Maybe
right?
that would-
Because if you look at the open space map, it has the underlying parcel data. So yeah, the city would be able to say that.
So if we wanted, again, the forest cover and open spaces is not terribly interesting, but
I have the full list of what KCD has as their defaults.
I
Their
just have
five,
it too.
five standards are census block. Census block group. Don't know why those are different.
Well, it's
All
like
that
it's
sense
a-
is-
HUC 12 watershed, which is all. We're one block, so that won't actually tell us much of anything. Zip code,
Again, that won't be
That
helpful
won't be
for
helpful.
us.
it's one of the default ones, and hexagonal grid.
Sounds like hexagonal's gonna win by default.
So we'll get all five of those are standard, and then we can get two custom that can be anything we provide the map for.
Oh, we need, like, they'll give us sense.
We get that no matter what,
And they'll get a census group.
we get those no matter what.
Census block group.
Okay, so there's no decisions to be made, it's really, we can choose two.
We can get two more. and-
Watershed is not in that list.
Pause.
Really, because she said, what she thought it was, we are in the Lake Washington watershed essentially, and it would be our whole city again, it'd be like a zip code.
Yeah.
Or
it's
if
okay.
But what would be helpful was to know the difference between Lion Creek and McAleer Creek. Or even just something that dealt with our wetlands. So those three. I think are ones that make sense.
What else can we choose
Oh,
from?
so these three are automatic.
yeah, they're all.
Long with it, not watershed, right? You said that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think watershed's
the
automatic.
HUC 12 watershed is automatic. It just doesn't
That's
tell
right,
us
it's
much.
automatic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just have
Those
it.
just doesn't tell.
those don't really matter. Okay.
Same thing.
And then
Uh,
Two more to pick, right?
census block and
What are
another
those?
was census block group.
Right.
Yeah,
A lot of-
and zip code, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I would,
As Larry said, it's pretty useful.
again, I'm not trying to put my hand on the scale.
But it comes anyway.
Yeah, since that is a default, there's no real debate to be had, so really the
So-
crux of the debate is. Which two of these four do you like as your add-ons?
We can, technically, we can have as many of those as we want. Or sorry, we can have up to four, so we can have two that will be free. And then if we want to pay $500 per geography, again, out of the KCD funds, we can get up to four that we provide maps for.
Or additional.
For total,
Four
so two for free, we can
from
pay
menu,
another
four from
500.
menu B. Menu A is, it comes with the deal.
Paul wants to look.
So for an additional
Stacy, are
$1,000, you
you
get
able
all
to
four.
actually open the map and see them?
Yeah, here, let me show you.
Like, it's the wetlands map.
So that would be like the 20,000 square foot zone.
I'll look at,
Oh,
you know, I-
That kind of zone. Zoning zone.
Does it get down to a
So
certain
definitely,
level?
again, that's really in
I'm in
integrity,
open
you know.
spaces right now.
Oh,
Here's one.
So maybe to help facilitate the conversation, of these four, are there any that someone feels would not be helpful for us to have?
Here's what it's gonna show us. But it says that there are
It's like all.
additional
all those would be
data layers, so.
Could be useful. You know, the good news is we don't need to decide this tonight. In fact. In fact, this is a program that's gonna go on throughout the next year. Ellen would like to move some things along, but.
Yeah. Again, Ellen would, the partner would like to see us move something ahead.
I think all pros are useful, I'm a little less convinced about open spaces, unless that means we get a map of open spaces. But simply knowing the canopy cover of open spaces. It's not so obviously useful. Can't be up for wetlands, I see, it's, I think portions are pretty important,
Yeah.
and I think zoning is important.
We know we have trouble finding places in our parks to plant
Oh.
trees.
Right.
video, just do a Google
Yeah.
search for city of Lake Forest
Okay.
Park.
For something like a park, you can take a satellite
Just
photo and say,
Do a
"Yeah,
Google
get
search
your
for
area here."
I just,
Oh, man.
the conversation getting a little chaotic, so I don't know if you wanna kind of bring it back into
I'm all
to
over
a
the
discussion.
Okay, okay. I think we should do that. Like I said, we don't have to figure this out tonight, but Larry's question is there anything in that left-hand column that we just would rule out at this point? Would zones be all that helpful?
The city might like to see it in zones.
Yeah.
I think
This would
from
be,
our perspective, parcel and open spaces, wetlands might be most interesting.
And from the city's perspective, if you look at the code. There are different percentages that, for instance, the RS, the 20,000 square foot zone. Like, I don't know, remember the exact number, but that might say you need at least 60% canopy. Whereas for the 10,000 square foot zone, you only need 40% canopy too.
I think it could be really.
So I think that would be helpful for the city to know, are we meeting or exceeding our goals? And like which zones are struggling the most?
It'd be really nice if they those own things. Deviation from the expected value. Required value, instead of just saying, this zone has so much. This zone 30% below, 20% below what we'd like to have. I don't know if that could be done or not.
So potentially this could be recommendation, and being mindful of Mark Kaufman's bandwidth. The recommendation might be to move forward with partnering with KCD for their standard plus for 5,000 total, we would get their standard plus these four. And so that could be the recommendation coming from the tree board. Full disclosure, where did Elizabeth go? We have another new staff member, a senior project manager dealing with surface water. And he also has a plan for some of this KCD money for a pilot for updates along the McAleer Creek watershed, encouraging more rain gardens and other water conservation. But there should be enough money in the pot for both his McAleer projects and also, 4 versus 5,000 is a fairly significant difference.
Can I make a point about the McAleer Creek? Really quickly, I received an email from Julia Bent, who had been the original grant. Requester, I think, to get that initial work done. And essentially, she said, if you and the tree board are at all interested in stewarding the project, basically the one she was working on, this could be a mechanism for you to get paid for it. And it's basically apply for a waterworks grant to fund water quality projects in your community. So I wonder if the work this new arborist, or I'm sorry, urban forest planner is doing could be funded
water specialist.
by a waterworks grant.
Like,
Something to think about.
You forward that to the rest of
Yeah,
us?
I will, for sure.
I'm going to share my screen one more time. To show so this is what we're looking at. This is would be the map that we would be looking at if we did the watershed one. So we would get the canopy coverage for all of the blue highlighted areas on this map.
yeah,
The wetlands.
well,
Or
that's wetlands.
sorry, wetlands, yeah,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
watershed.
so that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't look to me like that includes streams. It includes portions of streams. There are wetlands, which may in itself be helpful.
them right there, right?
Yeah,
Well, does it follow the whole length of McAleer Creek down?
Looks like it.
it looks like it.
Maybe it does.
They split off.
But it would just give us one number for each of those. Each of those wetlands, you think? This wetland is 30% forested.
I would guess that it would be by attribute, so I would guess that the entire area currently highlighted would get one number. That portion of McAleer would get one number, and this portion of McAleer would get one number, would be my assumption.
You know, it would be helpful, I mean, we don't need to figure this out tonight, but it would be helpful if we had a plan for for pursuing some of these questions, I think.
Well, what do we have to do tonight?
Tonight.
Yeah.
We just have to go over, I think, our assignments for the,
No, I'm sorry, Mark, for this topic.
for this
Do we-
topic.
Do we have to take action? Do we have to
No,
make a
no,
recommendation?
it's a matter of introducing it and getting us all on, thinking about it and starting to zero in on what we'd like to do with it. It does seem like a great opportunity we should take advantage of. The basic question is, we've done a lot of work on canopy coverage, right? And it's what it did cross my mind, that, well, do we just gonna really add anything to us, but I think it may well to some of the specifics that it'll call out for us.
I mean, this is data, right? I mean,
It's data, and it's cheap, it's really cheap data.
I'm going to recommend we strike open spaces from the list. This is the open spaces map and it's like
Nothing.
6 lots across the city that are, don't seem to be parsed. I don't know what this is.
Actually, I visited all those places a couple of years ago.
Okay.
No,
I mean, they're little tiny, they're places we might consider planting trees.
Yeah.
But the only way you're gonna find out whether we plant trees there is to go out there and say, yeah, there's a spot here. No, there's not. So I don't see that. I don't see $500. I don't see $500 of value in that.
I'm thinking of it like this, if some of us could take an assignment to work on over the next month. To try to research some of these particular geographies that were mentioned and figure out what's really there, like parcels.
So I'm not clear if there's a reason why we're kicking the can down the road on this, instead of just saying, let's move forward with parcel zones and wetlands. And call it good,
And then
because
figure
we
it
know
out.
we have all of those maps in the city.
Well, I don't know what the parcels.
The only map we have is city zoning. We don't have parcel.
Okay,
No, there is a link with King County that we need to figure out if we wanted to pursue that. And that may be right, we think we could, like.
and I think Ellen was
agree on
looking
this.
into whether King County had parcel data already.
Okay.
Yeah, she thought it did, but she didn't really know how to pursue it.
They love, I mean, it's on their maps, it's on the King County maps. They have to have the data if they can map.
Getting that data out,
Yeah.
and it's such a massive, do we have the
No, that's
capacity,
just a question.
do we have the capacity of City Hall to handle? The massive data that we would be calling for, I'm sure that we do, but I don't know who, do we have anybody at City Hall now who knows GIS? I don't know.
That has been a topic, hiring a GIS coordinator. It was taken out of the budget for this and next year, just for budget struggles.
Yeah.
But it is something this, in a rosier financial picture, the city would like to hire a GIS specialist.
If we got this giant download of data from King County. Well, maybe it goes directly to Planet Geo.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't need to do
Yeah, I
that.
mean, they've gotta be,
Well, Victoria's idea, I think, is good.
City zoning seems to actually be parcel, because this is giving me what appears to be every parcel.
Agreed.
So, I think we actually do have it. I think what we don't have is what we thought we meant by zone. So I think what we have is parcel and wetlands, and I move that we choose to move forward with KCD with parcel, wetlands, and their 5 defaults.
Yeah,
second.
I totally agree. 5 seconds.
Okay, what did you just say, Victoria? Say it again for me.
No, it's good, Mark, we're not going back.
That.
Have to vote, it's been moved and seconded, we need a, we
Want
Call the
to
vote.
pursue parcels and wetland in addition to the
Correct.
standard items.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you all convinced that we have that parcel data?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
what
it showed you a
on the
nice
screen.
map, but is that really?
It's downloadable in a table.
right, and
You can
again,
forward
people,
it.
That needs to put GIS data
Open.
behind it that we can share with Planet Geo.
Yeah,
or
should be
whatever.
So let's approve now that we want this, and if there's any glitches, we'll figure it out.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that could be the task if someone wants to take it, Mark, is to follow up on parcel data.
And just wetland data, they can get a better idea what that is. Do we have a consensus? Is there anybody who objects to this plan on
We
board?
have a motion and a second, we need to vote.
Okay, let's do it. Richard.
Favor.
yeah. Oh,
Richard seconded, so
All in favor?
Can you repeat?
I call the vote.
Can you repeat what?
I guess we're gonna state the motion.
No, it's
Just to make sure that Elizabeth has everything
Okay.
down square, let's go through the formality.
I move that we move forward with the KCD canopy analysis with their 5 defaults and our 2 options of parcel and wetland.
I second.
Is there?
it's already been seconded.
I second again. Okay, all in favor?
I'm in.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes, good.
Okay.
Now, I guess. Follow up on that. I can tell, I can communicate to Ellen Arnstein at KCD. Our decision tonight and what we're working on. She will say that this is a $4,000 project, which she's interested in. She'd like to get the contract. And she provided a 6-page draft of a contract that she'd like to take to the KCD board for them to approve doing this. So that may be all we need. We should probably get our city council to approve this. Do they need to approve?
Well, I know, so if a contract is below a certain threshold,
Yeah,
the mayor has the authority to just sign it. And it's, so if this is a $4,000 contract, I suspect that would be within the mayor's. Well, we'd want to get verification on that, but I believe it would be something the mayor could just sign on his own.
you want to do that, or I'm happy to try to pursue that.
Was it to me or to Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, yes. Would you be able to find out what, maybe through Mark or wherever, and how that the tree board feels we want to move ahead with this project with KCD. It's $4,000 item. It's data that we think would be helpful. And does anybody in the city need to approve that?
Okay.
I'm sure, don't you think that our attorney's gonna want to see a copy of the?
Most likely, yes. I just think, I don't think this will require council approval.
Yeah.
Also, we might just need to be mindful if it's an additional contract, just Mark Hoffman's bandwidth, and that of the two you've approved tonight, SFI and KCD, your priority is SFI. That's the more time critical.
Absolutely, this one is no time.
And so thanks Elizabeth making that clear to Mark that SFI is the one we really want to move forward. And KCD is small and hopefully easy, and so as bandwidth permits. Is that the sense of the tree board?
Yes, it is.
And if there's anything you or we can remark that help, that move either of those along.
Well, we'll have a chance to talk about this when we are at our next meeting, and I think that the assignment for all of us is maybe to think about these factors and do some of the research that Stacy's been doing and others, and looking at those maps and try to satisfy ourselves that we do have the information that they're gonna need to carry out those specific geographies.
That's the zoning maps.
Yeah.
Can you share this screen here? Sure. This is a little more informative map than the ones that I think we saw earlier.
I did send out, I believe, to everybody, the link to the KCD viewer that Victoria was just sharing with us. And if you need that again, let me know. I was hoping to have looked at it when we closed it.
I'm not used to this computer, it's very finicky.
So this shows the different zoning areas.
Yeah, so this would be 10,000 square foot
Right.
versus 15,000 square foot zoning versus multifamily or commercial.
Right. Now, would it be useful to have an estimate of forest? I guess it would just be the total canopy cover for that, each of those colors.
Yes, it would be the average canopy coverage for those zones.
Yeah, I guess my question is, would that be useful? That'd be $500 would be useful. Put that back up there. I know we can always we can always amend it.
Well, it's kind of tempting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would it make sense?
Sorry, for which one?
Having it broken up by the colors on here, so do
Because-
you want a overlay that's the different zoning?
Those are land use zones, right? So having that as an additional geography.
I just think that the city's gonna need that. Or what Larry was saying, if you're gonna, our canopy goals are set by zone, so why would we not need to see the data by zone?
So then what you'd want to do is someone make a motion to amend or to make a motion to reconsider your previous vote and amend it by adding zoning for an additional $500.
I,
Well, would someone like to basically make the motion I just said? Since one of you has to make it.
I move we reopen the discussion.
Second. All approved? We're gonna go around this, okay, we're gonna open, any opposed? Okay, we're gonna have this discussion. And so the new proposal is,
Do we I'll take zoning for $500. We'll add zoning to our list of things we want, massive.
Any discussion on that? Is there a motion to accept that, a modified proposal?
I propose that we accept, Doug's.
Is there a second?
I second.
Oh, good. Is all in favor? Yes. All right. Any opposed? No. Thank you.
Well done.
And thank you for explaining how to do that.
I mean, it's Robert's rules can be fairly informal in a small group, and so I think. As on Elizabeth, is it clear what the will of the tree board is on this topic? I think that that's really the most important thing.
Let me know, Elizabeth, if you have any questions about how you follow up on that. Just to find out what authority we need to pursue on that from the city's point of view.
Yeah,
And it might be also to ask a question, because I think I can have a draft contract very quickly. For the attorney to look at, and sure, even a small contract she probably wants to look at. If there's no other discussion, we have one other piece of business to do tonight, right? That is just to once more talk about picnic in the park. And the farmer's market on October 6th.
Yep.
So picnic in the park is this Saturday. What you all worked this out the last meeting, I think. Everybody knows what they're doing. It's 11 to 3.
It is 11 to 3, setup begins at 10. We do have a table claimed. We need to provide our own table chairs canopy. I've got a canopy and the table I'm happy to bring.
Got a
I also
table.
have chairs.
Give me a second table. I have
If you want. Up to you. I plan to be there probably not at 10 since our table only takes about 5 minutes to set up. So, but we have to be there by 10:40. So I plan to be there about 10:30. And Stacy, I think you were going to work the morning with me,
Yeah,
11 to 1-ish.
yeah,
And
this
then
is Saturday.
this Saturday, correct. Richard, you still available to do the afternoon?
Yes, I would like to know specifically what time you think that is.
1 to 3, that work for you?
That works.
Can you remind me which park I'm picnicking?
Animal Acres.
Thank you.
Big family.
There's no picnic by parking over there.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
gonna walk.
Anybody else gonna help Richard out on that afternoon?
I'll plan to
session?
stay all day.
Yeah,
I'm happy to.
I've got a meeting at 3:30. But I will try to be there too. In that, for that last part of that slot, or maybe even over slot. Good. You have chairs, you said?
I can bring a couple chairs.
Oh, I'll also bring my own.
I'm just gonna bring camp chairs.
Perfect.
Just we'll take a quick look at October the 6th, then, as we're sharing a table at the farmer's market with the Climate Action Committee. I know I had some old notes that kind of laid that out. Everybody was volunteering for that at one point.
What
I
day
think we
is that?
said you and I,
Yeah.
Stacy and I both volunteered to be there.
That's 10 to 2.
October 6th,
I believe it's
Fifth.
October
that's
5th.
a Monday.
It's
Okay,
the
fifth.
fifth.
Okay,
Fifth,
that's
okay,
not bad.
thank you.
Yeah.
I can be there,
Good.
whatever time we need.
I volunteered for the morning.
It's 10 to 2,
You wanna do the morning, you wanna do the afternoon?
they do that.
Anybody else? I can do
Nice to
that.
have a couple
I'm
people
happy to do as
there.
much of the day as you
I
want.
can do
One
that.
time we did that before, we were constantly engaged, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I'll plan on that. What is it, 12 to 2 slot as well.
And we invite the arborists to come. Wants to,
Yeah, it's a good idea.
again.
I'll come morning with Stacy.
And then you
Did
and I
two
for the
people for the
afternoon?
afternoon, or did
Okay.
we?
I'll do the
I'm
afternoon.
happy with that. You know,
So,
right as the
10
market
noon and
closes, you get good
12,
buys
yeah.
on everything. Right there, right at 1:45.
Get all the kettle corn.
Okay.
I love that kettle corn. So good.
I finagled myself a free popsicle at the end of the last market I went to,
Wow.
from Seattle Pops. I've got our tabling supplies, thank you, Elizabeth. Is there any ideas of things that folks would like, new materials or flyers, info sheets that you would like made before this Saturday?
We did, a small point, but we did have, at the last meeting, we talked about getting information from Linda Holman about the.
I've not heard
Blue
anything
Heron.
else from her. I
Yeah.
think she's gonna meet with her other group and then let us know.
Okay.
I
I had a connection with her I said I'd get back in touch with her when I got back after being away.
And she sent me a note and I haven't called her back either.
There's something we thought
Not
she
gonna be
might.
away a week.
It's about the
I
parent-
offered if she had info she wanted us to share about how people could get involved with
Involved
it,
in the blue.
we
parent.
would be happy
Yeah.
to share it, but I haven't heard anything from her on it.
Maybe just send her an
Yeah.
email. I would send her a star.
That would be great.
Great
Coffee
opportunity.
meets, I don't know.
Yeah.
Victoria can make anything out of paper, basically, if you want.
I do.
Leaves, maple leaves.
I have the coloring sheets with some like tree facts about like Forest Park trees, and I'll bring colored pencils and crayons again. Kids came and colored last year.
It's a heavily oriented towards children.
Yes, it is very much a family event, and they highly encourage people to have activities for kids. So if you have any other brilliant ideas that can be executed in the next 48 hours, let me know.
Okay. Well, you do such a great job with that. Yeah, thanks for all that.
Absolutely.
Might be nice if there's still an opportunity to get trees
I think it may be too late for the October thing.
for the
Someone
October.
could acquire, there was a state tree nursery that we got seedlings from
Yeah,
that
Yes.
previous time. I didn't do it, so I don't, but somebody had to drive down to Olympia, I think, to pick them up and he did. Yeah,
I would be willing to do that again.
No idea if this is feasible, but I think the city of Shoreline is currently doing a tree giveaway. And I wonder, like, if hypothetically, if they had extra trees at the end of it, might that, I have no idea, but might that be an avenue?
I can pursue that. Next, or if we all just went there and said we were from Shoreline. Pick up a couple of trees.
I think Shoreline needs those trees more than we do.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Okay. What if they got extras?
yeah.
Are you okay? With the plan for picnic in the park, we're good? Okay,
Yeah.
anything else we should talk about in that regard, or anything else we wanna talk about tonight before we adjourn? Well, that's.
Agenda for the October tree board?
Yeah. And that date is October 1. So we'll have a chance to talk about. The farmer's market again. Well, let's see, what do we want to, do we want to well, we should have a report on the SFI. Because it sounds like there's some action that will take place between now and our next meeting to continue our discussion with those people. So SFI is gonna be on the agenda. Gonna talk again about, I suppose we should revisit the KCD and say whatever, as we've had a chance. I know I'm feeling this, I didn't get a chance to look at that KCD viewer and get more familiar with it. Because I think they offer a reporting process, a paper reporting, but it's kind of pricey. So we may want to look at that. I mean, it was like $1,000 for a 2-page report. And for a longer extended report, it was pricey. I was surprised at that. It sounds like the way our data will be available to us will be just on that viewer that we're looking at. That's what
It can be downloaded, put it on the city website.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean,
That's
I'm
right.
gonna say, I'm sure, I think we can.
And that's the way what people would use it, which.
But we want to
Review
review
that,
that.
for $1,000, not seem like bargain.
Review the KCD status. What else should be on our agenda? We had it.
I would point out, setting up your work plan for 2026, or have you done? Have you done that yet, or, oh, never mind then.
We need to do that in a few months, I think.
Over
You
2026,
should do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, no.
We may want to do a check-in on our 2025 work plan and see how it's
Yeah.
going though.
That's good. Yeah, I was thinking of that too.
Good opportunity to do it as we're orienting Sam to what we're working on as well.
Yeah, okay.
Before we close the meeting, I do have updates from Washington DNR on seedling availability.
Great, I'm sorry, say what?
I have seedling availability information before we close the meeting,
Okay.
but we can finish with agenda topics for next meeting.
Well, I don't know, is anybody, we still have one open position, right? And we on this,
tree board,
Good too.
And we do have an open position, yes.
one open now, and one, and I rotate off in February.
Not that you're counting down or anything.
So it might be good to have that on the agenda. As
Recruiting ideas.
Yeah.
We do have 2 events coming up. We have lots of recruiting flyers in that box.
We'll talk to
Make sure Esther leaves some one.
Yeah.
about the application process, right? That's a good thing, that'd be a good thing to do, talk about that. And that's something for us to talk about at picnic in the park and at farmers market.
there's that.
That's a surprising leaky pipeline, you know, the pipeline from becoming interested in the tree board to being on it. I've had a lot more people express interest in new members.
It actually materializes, you know.
Yeah. We hope it will fall out the pipeline. If you're saying enter the pipeline, we hope you will fall out the.
Okay, well, other ideas emerge, share them with me and Victoria and see what they get. Any other thing we need to talk about tonight?
Victoria's information on tree seeding.
Yes, yes.
I can send the link to you all, or you can search just Washington DNR nursery. Weber Nursery currently is accepting pre-order requests for the 25-26 planting season. Requests are pre-order requests are open till September 12th. And are not guaranteed. It's not first come, first serve. And then after September 12th, you can continue to order based on availability. Orders are confirmed by early October, so I don't think that it will work for either of these events. And seedlings are available for pickup, or it sounds like they can ship in winter and spring 25-26, and they need 5 days lead time in order to prepare orders. They only sell them in full bag quantities, and I don't know how many are in a bag. Possibly 100.
We got about 100.
I think
We
it's
got
100.
200 last time.
And they have a variety of different seedling types.
Oh, they
So
do.
this is potentially something we could look at for, it sounds like an Arbor Day
Yeah.
event, if we want to
Yeah.
plan ahead for a spring event. But timing does not align nicely for either of our fall events.
Does it indicate how much they are?
Yes, depending on the type of seedling, orders up to 600 are anywhere from 75 cents to $1.35 per seedling.
Just from you said, if there's like 100 in a bag, they'd all be the same species.
Correct.
So then we wouldn't be able to have variety of like here, this tree's gonna become 50 feet tall versus 20 feet tall.
Correct.
All of them are probably conifers and large trees, like this,
Yeah.
like Douglas fir,
I don't have that
western
list.
cedar, and
There is a whole list of seedling species and stock types that you can read through.
Should we put this on is the timing such we could talk about this at our next meeting?
We could, it will be past the pre-order deadline, but we can still, if they have stock, you can continue to place orders.
Well, I don't know that we want to hash this out anymore tonight.
I will send this link to you all if you want to look at it.
Yes.
They also, FYI, you can get gallon trees for $10 a piece, so I will be driving to Olympia and buying like 20 trees in October.
And the intent
It's
is-
very affordable.
Like, just to be clear, the intent would be to give these away at one of our events,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
And the prices I quoted are for like not potted little seedling starts.
yeah, they come in a little plastic bag, where it's
Yeah.
just the root zone and a little soil
Yeah,
about this long and a seedling thick on top.
yeah,
I took a dozen of them home and
all of them. died.
almost all of them.
Yeah.
I think I
I've got
survived.
filling out the survey for the Arbor Day, I forgot the name of it, if you fill out a survey, they send you a bunch of tree seedlings. I all died.
Yeah.
Well, did you take good care of them or did you leave them on the porch?
No,
I planted them out in the woodlot behind our house and just
Planted
ignored
them.
it. But the point was just to get things in the ground, right? I wasn't gonna go up and water them or anything.
Yeah.
But deer is what the biggest problem
sure.
is. They got chewed up.
Well, okay, well, maybe we can pursue this at our next meeting and have a chance to look at that website, see if that's how we want to do that. I mean, if you're getting a 90% mortality rate of these trees, I don't know.
You know, I think if people plant them in their side yard and the deer don't get on
Whether
it,
deer were to get it.
water them for the first few years, they'll probably have a much better success.
Okay. Is there any other business or we got? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I will move.
Second, so all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Very exam, I'll let.
Not progress, but forward, yes.
I thought that was one of our best meetings.